the government of Ethiopia, this starving country, whose little children, fly-infested, kwashiorkor swollen, famished, famine-stricken children, has been encouraged, armed, trained, financed and otherwise facilitated to invade and occupy its neighbour Somalia and create a reign of terror in that land, which is testified to by this voluminous Amnesty International report, which if I had time I would extensively quote from. Somalia has lost thousands of dead as a result of the Ethiopian invasion. Millions have been displaced. Somalia, under Ethiopian occupation, is the grimmest prison state in Africa. Worse, far worse than Mugabe's Zimbabwe. And who has done the encouraging, the arming, the training, the financing and the facilitating? The same US and British governments who donated the $90 million to the same Ethiopian government which is burning its money and burning the villages, the neighbourhoods and the people of occupied Somalia. This government is never done talking about the shortcomings of African leaders. Just last week in Rome, the Secretary of State for International Development was roaring at Robert Mugabe. Yet there has not been a squeak out of him or any other minister about the much bigger crime in which we are ourselves deeply complicit. Is it any wonder that African opinion considers so much of what we have to say about misgovernance in Africa to be the deepest, most cynical hypocrisy? 2 weeks ago, Channel 4's dispatches team took terrifying risks to bring us the latest from occupied Mogadishu. It was undoubtedly an award-winning documentary. It was memorable for many reasons, not least the scene in the FCO when the Minister, Lord Malak Brown, his face frozen in horror, was confronted by Adam Hartley with the central case of the documentary makers, which for those members who didn't see it, I know that the Minister will have seen it. She could hardly be sent out to bat on this wicket without being shown it, was this: that in the grim prison state of occupied Somalia, the fingerprints of our country and our government are all over the scene of the crime. The president of the puppet regime imposed by the Ethiopian army in Somalia turns out to be British. He spends much of his time here. Well, it's dangerous in Somalia after all. He has property here, family here. He presides over a gang of torturers, murderers, grand larceners, extortionists, and then flies back to England. The police chief, whose police officers kidnap people for ransom, which they extort from people living in our own country, in Leicester, in Birmingham, in London. His police officers torture people. They make them disappear. They kill them if their families will not pay. He's British too, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And the former Interior Minister, who presides over an interior of mass refugee camps, starvation and misery, and who stands accused of stealing international aid, of diverting food for political purposes, why, he also is British. And guess what? Who's paying the wages of the murdering, kidnapping, torturing, quizzling police force in Ethiopian-occupied Somalia? That's right, we are. The puppet dictatorship in Somalia is a very British crime, especially as our own government, especially the pocket-sized Palmerston, the Secretary of State hitherto referred to, is so very voluble on other problems in Africa. So how did we get here? How did we get into bed with the former pro-Albanian Maoists of the government in Addis Ababa? I'm afraid it's our old friend, our old acquaintance. The policy of my enemy's enemy is my friend. This policy, which has put us in so much trouble, from Afghanistan to Iraq and many other parts of the world, is what lies behind this obscene paradox. We're supporting the Ethiopian government's occupation of Somalia because George Bush told us to. Because Somalia is a front line in George Bush's ill-conceived, counterproductive, utterly discredited, about to be booted out in the United States, so-called war on terror. We are against the former government of Somalia because it was an Islamic government. Just as we're against the government in